Hello, everybody. I'm Carol Massar of Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV, Bloomberg Business Week. And I'm here with Jared Spataro. He's Corporate Vice President of Microsoft 365. Jared, it is so great to have you back with us because you guys accumulate so much data that really gives us an idea of how this working from home has been working out during the pandemic. We have some great numbers to get through. Before we start, though, generally speaking, hybrid, working from home, has it turned out to be the work savior that we thought it would be?
Well, if we go back a year, I think one of the big questions that people had was simply, would people work from home? Would they be able to work from home? Would they watch Netflix? The numbers actually show us that productivity has continued at about the same rate. In some cases, it's increased. And so, it has saved businesses. At the same time, as we're going to see in the numbers, it is masking the exhaustion that the workforce is feeling as a result of it. So there's a real tension here that we're feeling. The numbers bear that out.
I have so many conversations about stress and digital exhaustion in general. How has it changed, though? Because you guys have done data points throughout the past year. How has it progressed? How have the data points, generally speaking, changed?
Well, initially we saw a year ago as people were just trying to adjust, there was a real scramble trying to figure out what tools to use, how that would work. We've seen an explosion of really time in meetings. That's become the tool that people have used to connect. Oh, we need to meet. Let's set 30 minutes on the calendar. We're going to need 60 minutes for that. And so we've seen things really take off, in that way. People have more meetings on the calendar. In fact, their time in meetings has more than doubled. And at the same time, their feeling of connection to their team has actually gone down. We released an update to our report yesterday that said that at the beginning of the pandemic, employees reported 91% of employees reported feeling connected to their team. By the time we got to December of last year, that had dropped to 79%. So we're seeing kind of those ties start to weaken a bit.
Hey, let's take a step back because I'm assuming everybody knows the data points. Microsoft, we know you accumulate millions of data points. Tell us you do this Microsoft Work Trend Index. Tell us exactly what you're looking at and the kind of data that you're accumulating.
You bet. For me, this is, I love this study because it quantifies a lot of what we're feeling. And so what we did is we went out across 31 different countries. We took a survey of more than 30,000 employees, people working in organizations of all sizes. We were just trying to get a sense of how they were feeling and what they were experiencing. So we asked them questions like, how connected do you feel to your team? What do you feel about your workload? What do you think about the expectations that your employer has for you? Then we took those data points and we just sliced and diced them, trying to understand the trends, what was happening. And then trying to understand things like, were there correlations with demographic differences? And that's where we started to tease out since the difference between leaders and employees who aren't leaders in an organization. And we started to see some trends that really popped for us.
All right, so let's drill down because what I do love about it is this data is so specific. So let's go through some. First of all, big picture, you guys took a look at meetings, emails, chat, documents. We've got a slide for our viewers. So let's talk about this. So 148%, what was that, increase in meetings?
Correct. Increase in meeting minutes. And I love this chart that folks are looking at right now. What it shows you is, as you look at the two different axes we're looking at, top and bottom, you can see meeting minutes and you can see chat minutes. What's happening here is you see an initial spike, so this bump that goes up as people all start to work from home. You might think that that would come down over time, but if you watch those lines, they continue to go up. So we have not only seen that initial spike that everybody felt, we also continue to see these meeting and chat minutes grow over time. That's creating this sense of digital exhaustion. If you look up top, you can see some of the numbers that are pretty astounding. As an example, the average team user sends 45% more chats per week. They're doing 42% more chats after hours. There's a 66% increase in the number of people working in documents. As you add these things up, they end up being weight. It really compounds that feeling of exhaustion that we talked about.
All right, so let's drill down a little bit further. What's interesting, too, is you guys looked at and this is what I love, like the disconnect between what leaders and leadership might be seeing versus their employees that are working at home. Let's pull up the slide, and this takes a look specifically at that, because leaders are starting to kind of make decisions and think about, all right, what does our workspace need to look like?
That's right. Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of data points we can interleave here. Let's first just talk about this idea of flexibility and what people are wanting. We are finding that people do want more time with their team. 67% of people want more in-person time with their team. So they're saying, hey, I'd love to see the people I work with in person. That just seems to be so important to them. At At the same time, over 70% of them are saying that they like the flexibility that they've had during the pandemic. I have people tell me, boy, I'm getting, as an example, to eat breakfast with my kids for the first time ever. I get to drop my kids off at school in some cases where schools have restarted. So they like that flexibility. Bosses have started to reconfigure their workspaces already. And so we see that 66%, or it's called 2/3 of bosses, are already starting physical space redesigns to make this happen. But that is masking kind of this greater trend that you indicate, where we see kind of this bifurcation in how people have weathered the storm here. When we look at people with decision-making authority, 61% of those folks say that they are thriving in the current time. So they're really doing well. When we compare that, however, to the average worker, that's a full 23 percentage points higher than that average worker. And here on the data points that you're showing in the slide, we can actually see some of the real differences. Up top, you see the percentage of folks who are saying that they are thriving. Down below, you see folks who are saying that they are just surviving. So this is a real difference. It is creating that wrenching feeling that we have just all across the world. It's not a United States thing. And it really is setting us up to need to solve this.
Well, what's great about this, and hold this slide up for a second, Jared, because business leaders, that's all the way on the left, if you're looking at the screen, 61% say that they're thriving, 39% say that they're surviving or struggling. But if you look at married, working moms, Gen Z, frontline workers, single, like you can see that there are some groups that are really having a tough time with this.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, the things that jump out to me, the single folks, very clear that there's a feeling of isolation. I certainly feel that as we have gone to do what we'd call the qualitative work to talk to people, not just do the numbers. That pops out really quickly. And then, as you indicated, if we look in there, working moms, we've seen lots of reports on that. We see the numbers here. And Gen Z is the one that was somewhat surprising to me, because I just would think of them as digitally connected.
Yeah.
You would have thought of them as digital natives. But they are really struggling here. And in fact, one of the conclusions from our report is this idea that we're going to have to re-energize Gen Z when it comes to their engagement in the workforce. There's something going on here over the last 12 months that really means something to the workforce dynamic.
Listen, and I don't want to get to, I know sometimes with demographics, you have to be careful with age, but we've talked about this, had these conversations, Jared, that if you're older and you've got established relationships, working from home was probably easier. You weren't bashful about, picking up or saying to a boss, oh, I want to do a Zoom call, or just giving them a call. Younger ones, or even maybe new employees to a place, they were kind of lost.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, if I pick it up for a moment and just think about some of the things that we were seeing again in the qualitative work, Gen Z tends to be more single, more early in career. They have less broad, less deep networks. They have less experience in the workplace. So you add those things up and they compound. They really do make a difference in how someone is doing. We also see, just a difference in terms of where they are and length of time with the company to understand how the culture works. At Microsoft, just as a data point, over the course of the pandemic, so the last 12 months, we've hired 25,000 people who have never set foot inside any of our offices. So that's a really big kind of influx of talent that we've got to bring in some way in a digital environment.
Hey, we did a poll of our audience today, and we talked to about 900 that took the poll and asked the question, Jared, has your productivity suffered in the work from home environment? So from working from home, has your productivity suffered? And what we found is about 49% said yes, nearly 51% said no. So it's kind of interesting how people are seeing it. It's kind of almost an even split. What would you say, generally speaking, has been kind of, our views on how productive we are? Because I know I felt pretty productive early on, but I do feel like as it dragged on, it was a little exhausting in terms of there was no delineation between home and work.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Your numbers taken then just mirror what we've seen around the world with these 30,000 people. A lot of people are saying, yeah, I'm, at least as productive. Maybe I'm a little bit more productive. But there are a couple of kind of data points, I think, that help us get a sense for the texture, the feel of what's actually going on. So when we look at kind of, this idea of, okay, you're productive, but what else is happening? We see that there is this sense that there's a burden. And let me quantify the burden for a moment. 54% of workers globally, even though they said they were productive, said that they feel overworked. So over half of folks saying they feel overworked. Almost 40%, 39% said that they feel absolutely exhausted. That's a very strong word to use in this case. And so it was this sense of like, hey, I was doing good in the beginning, but now it's very, very difficult. And then that leads us to one that I think is a really interesting part of the whole equation here, especially for managers and leaders to understand, is what's happening to networks. What we found is there was a spike initially in the strength of networks, how people reported they were feeling with their coworkers. That spiked, and then mostly it's held steady. So people have essentially leaned on the people they know best to get things done. But what we've seen is what we call weak ties, these ties out to other groups that maybe you just bumped into people, maybe you saw them every once in a while in a meeting. Those ties have diminished almost entirely. They have become very, very weak. So the net result is organizations have become more siloed. And I feel that at work, many people feel that. That's an example of something that's changing the dynamic of how we can actually get work done organizationally. And that's a cause of concern, I'd say, for leaders.
It's kind of interesting if you think about the last couple of years, the work trend has been these open environments, right? Nobody has offices anymore. And so it's kind of open door. You're running into your boss or different colleagues that you might not. That's very much the culture of us here at Bloomberg. And then all of a sudden you go to you're siloed in your home. It's such a contrast. Is there, like, what have we learned as a result of that? You guys are collecting all the data points.
Yeah, we have just learned. I mean, it has been known for a long time in organizational studies that these weak ties, this kind of bumping into people as you indicate, that's actually what brings things together. Creativity, as an example, really thrives very best in an environment where you're taking ideas that may not be within your kind of immediate network. So what we've learned is that this can affect creativity, that the idea that you're just kind of very siloed and working with the people that you work with the most, you can end up really in a place of groupthink. You can end up not being able to tap into all the resources in your organization. So the most important thing we think that leaders can do is to be very deliberate. This is a moment, and I hope we get to that here soon, where it's not just all downside. Of course there's pressure, of course there's this idea of exhaustion, but boy, there is upside here for us. And so we recommend that you not only kind of look at the glass as half empty, but also look at it as half full and see what we can do going forward as well.
Jared, one of the things about this past year, right? We've had many crises. We've talked a lot about racism, inequities that have been unearthed. And so I do wonder, the working from home situation, because of the pandemic, what about the inequities that already existed in workforce, whether you're a minority, whether you're a woman? We talked a little bit about, women working from home at this point. I mean, what do the data points show? Has it gotten worse as a result of it? Or can working from home ultimately, or hybrid, help out some of these groups?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist, so I love to look at the silver lining to the cloud here, and it definitely has. We were able to pull in signals from all across our network. One of those places was LinkedIn, and we saw that over the last 12 months that we have seen job postings on LinkedIn that were remote increased by 5x, so 5 times as large as they were previously. That just simply indicates that remote is becoming more a part of our culture. Now, what's that mean for us? Well, the good news is we're finding that women, Gen Z, and those without graduate degrees actually are more likely to apply for those remote jobs than anyone else. In other words, they're saying, hey, that flexibility could really help me out. If we take that even further, what I'd love to see now is that as people are starting to open up their ideas in terms of, I think we can pull this remote thing off for a longer period of time if we incorporate it into our operating model, we're starting to see companies now tap into talent pools they haven't been able to get. As an example, Microsoft has always been pretty Redmond-centric when it's come to kind of our product development culture and the work that we do here in Redmond. I'm really excited. We're starting to hire in Atlanta. I just hired a fantastic executive in Atlanta. We've, the time that I told her that she could stay in Atlanta and didn't need to move for this job was the time it opened up for her. And so again, it's just a great anecdotal example of what we're able to do as we tap into new labor pools with the technology and the new operating model. So I'm very excited about that.
Jared, we've got questions coming in, and I do wonder, are there any data points that you guys have collected that kind of say what employees are thinking about? All right, what does it mean if I choose to work home and a colleague of mine chooses to go to the office? Am I going to be disadvantaged long term?
Well, here's the thing that I don't think anyone will be surprised about, but FOMO is real, right? This fear of missing out is something that we all feel. And the data and the the qualitative results really point to this idea that people are very worried about what's next. So here's how I think about it. When we all were in the office, I think we had figured that out after many decades. When we all have been home, we've kind of mostly learned how to do that. We are just about ready to enter into what I'm calling the messy middle, where some people are going to be in the office and some people won't. And so there is this real fear right now that, wow, what happens if the boss goes in? Does that mean I've got to go in? If I don't go in, or I choose these flexible work from home policies, as we see many people want to, does that mean I can't advance or be promoted in my career? And so our perspective on this, as we've gone around and kind of looked at the data and talked to so many companies, is this is a moment of leadership where leaders need to recognize, hey, you can't just let this play out. The kind of default play out rhythm here is going to turn into a little bit of chaos and be the worst of all worlds. So leaders need to stand up and be really thoughtful. In particular, one just very specific thing I can tell leaders is you've got to model this idea of sometimes staying home. When you do that and people see, oh, the boss stayed home, it looks like she stayed home, I can stay home sometimes too. That's going to make all the difference. That's how you lead culturally, and that's what the findings are really pointing us towards.
Jared, let's talk a little bit more about what leaders need to do. And I think what's interesting is we get more data points as you guys collect them. You see how the data points have either progressed or moved or changed. I mean, companies, I know leaders, CEOs who have already shut down their offices in New York and moved out because they say all our workers want to be at home. Do we need to kind of take a moment to digest what has happened in the past 12 months? We're not out of it yet, but do we need to take, as leaders, a moment to kind of digest it before we start making some big policy changes in how we are working at companies?
Absolutely. What I tell leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone else, but what I tell leaders is this is a moment to stop, pause, think, really take counsel from the people around you, and see it as a moment of leadership. I see, again, the silver lining, this awesome opportunity in front of us to take the best of all worlds and combine them together. But in order to do that, the way I'd phrase it is you've got to come up with a new operating model. That operating model is going to have some cultural changes. It's going to have some norms that are new. It's going to have, in some cases, policies. You can't do that on your own. You really need to make yourself a student of the time. Get counsel from people around you. Involve people who are going to be taking the ramifications of your decisions, and recognize that we're all going to learn as we go. So this idea of a plan, and in particular a plan that takes into account your people and what they want, your space and how you'll deal with that space, and then finally the technology that you'll use to bind it all together. For us, this is the moment to really look at that. I think, whenever you have a crisis, it really reveals the man or woman in charge. You get this opportunity to stand up and show your vision, and that's what I encourage leaders to do today.
You mentioned, technology, and we've got an audience question that comes in. That you guys, in terms of your research, have you looked at anything when it comes to fatigue? Are there differences between video meetings versus audio calls?
Absolutely. And not only, I would tease out not just video meetings and audio calls, what the technology can do today is that it essentially gives us a whole bunch of different modes of communication. There are, for instance, what we call real-time modes, just like we're having right now, where we can go back and forth, with no delay in between us. That includes things like audio calls. It includes, depending on how we use it, chat. Certainly includes video. There's also kind of asynchronous tools, things that allow us to, place a message. Email is probably the best known of that, but even chat can be used in this way. Mm-hmm. And so what we are seeing is that we have to develop new, much healthier digital habits. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When all you have is a video conference, you think that's the way to get work done. So we're encouraging people to be a bit more broad in their thinking and make sure that they think about all the different modes of communication and collaboration. Doing that will reduce digital fatigue. We don't always have to be talking to each other to get things done, and that's an important eureka moment when you realize it.
I don't always want to be on a Zoom call. I'm just going to put it out there. But you're right, like variety. I remember last time you were on and that we talked for our Bloomberg Live audience, I think you talked about the backgrounds of people, right? That having too many different backgrounds visually was just overstimulating. And so you kind of provided some conformity when it comes to that. We just have about a minute or so left. Final thought, do you think, in a year, if you do another round of data points, what do you think will be maybe some of the themes, trends when it comes to how work is shifting?
Boy, I think we'll see a couple. First off, I think we're going to see a real difference in companies. Those who have had leaders who have stood up and recognized, wow, the decisions I make right now are going to set me on a trajectory, a course for growth going forward. We're going to see a difference in their performance. We're going to see a difference in their ability to attract talent. Those who let this play out, they're going to find themselves in a world of hurt, because we're essentially going to see compounding effects of digital exhaustion. That's number one. Number two, I think we're all going to wake up and recognize that the labor market has changed in massive ways, kind of right underneath our feet. Two data points that I'll end us with that we didn't talk about previously is 46% of people are saying that they are planning a physical relocation as a result of the more flexible policies they expect. 41% of people are contemplating leaving their current employer. I don't think anybody's ready for this massive earthquake within the talent pool that we're feeling, but there is upside. That means that companies who are proactive are going to go find the best talent and bring them into their organizations and really differentiate themselves from others. So I think there's going to be a culling, if you will, of the business community. We're going to see those leaders who are effective at this time, and we're going to see those who become laggards as well.
Just very, very quickly, so will this grand experiment that was forced on us, will we kind of look back and say we've learned a lot in a good way? Just quickly.
I think so. I think we will. I think there's the best of both worlds available if we will be proactive. I think there's the worst of all worlds that will fall upon us if we're not.